President Trump's recent orders on immigration and national security are meeting with strong resistance around the country, especially in major cities. In Boston, the response includes a campaign to limit cooperation by local and state agencies with federal enforcement. Our guest is from one of the groups calling for passage of the Safe Communities Act, the Massachusetts Immigrant and Refugee Advocacy Coalition, or MIRA coalition. We'd like to welcome the organizing director, Liza Ryan. Thank you very much for being with us, Liza.
Thank you, Chris.
First of all, talk about what you mean by safe communities.
That's a really great question. The Safe Communities Act, which was formally filed as a smaller version until we expanded it this legislative cycle under the Trust Act, that is really, and limiting is an interesting word to use in this context. So Immigrations and Custom Enforcement is a federal job. It's not the job of state or local police to do that. And in fact, when we talk about limiting that engagement, it's just a request that the federal Immigrations and Custom and ICE asks state and local police to do, in some ways, their job for them. And we're saying, and the state doesn't get repaid for doing their job. So we're saying we don't want, as Massachusetts taxpayers, to pay for the federal government's job, because we think that that makes our communities less safe. It means that a local police officer is not just a local police officer, somebody that you can go to when you are in need, if you have witnessed a crime or something has happened to you. Now communities, and disproportionately communities of color and vulnerable communities, have to be afraid to go to their local police officer because he is now also someone who could deport them or deport their family. And so they're not going to report crime. And so we have found, by talking with the superintendent of the police force in Boston, that's why he has stood up so strongly for these types of ordinances, because it says it makes our community more safe, and in this community policing model. And it also means that police can spend more time doing their job, which is keeping our community safe, instead of doing the job of the Trump administration's Federal Immigrations and Custom Enforcement Agency.
Well, as you know, there are many other people out there whose idea of safe means that if you stop someone who turns out to be an unauthorized immigrant and there's something in their background that's really disturbing, maybe they're wanted for a violent crime, they want that person to be held, don't they? And
this bill is in complete compliance with that. So anytime somebody who would be stopped for a crime and they are booked and their fingerprints go into the system, that information goes to every database, law enforcement database in the country, which includes the Federal Immigrations Customs Enforcement. So ICE can come and pick them up there. But the reason why we call this bill, this is also based on the Fourth Amendment, is that if our local police were to say, for example, in what many of these agreements are asking for, is to hold somebody an extra amount of time after they are legally able to be released. Now that functions as double jeopardy. That's an unlawful arrest, and that puts Massachusetts on the case. We could be taken to court. The ACLU could take Massachusetts to court and say that is illegal. You are violating the Constitution. In fact, the reason that some cities that are not what we would consider liberal or that welcoming to immigrants, for example, maybe you would consider New Orleans one of that, is a trust ordinance or a quote-unquote sanctuary city, because they didn't want to pay the fees in the legal battle because they were breaking the Constitution by doing this. And so what we are saying is that we need to be on the proper legal footing. We also don't want to pay for it because it's not our job. That is the job of the federal government. And why should Massachusetts taxpayers pay for Trump's deportation agenda?
We're talking with Liza Ryan from the Massachusetts Immigrant and Refugee Advocacy Coalition. Liza, what about the travel ban? I know there's been a lot of controversy about this, but I know the one justification they keep coming back to is that at least in one of these countries here, there were people who came in under the guise of being refugees, and they got involved in an act of terrorism, at least in Europe. Don't they have to be worried about something like that here?
There have been 0 attacks in the United States by any person from these countries on U.S. soil. Over and over again, we have seen, specifically in the countries that were chosen from these places, there have been 0 attacks. So if we were to apply that, in our country, how many people are killed in gun violence, and yet we still have a proliferation of weapons? if we were to apply the same logic, then we would have no guns left in here. What's more, the attackers from 9/11 were from Saudi Arabia, were from, a couple from Egypt, from the UAE, and those countries are exempt from that. Now, I understand part of the rationale behind this ban is that the countries that are on this list are in chaos. That means that the people who are there are the victims themselves of terrorism, and we are shutting our doors to them. What this does, and I have actually worked in the Middle East for a number of years in the countries and worked with refugees from Somalia. I lived in South Sudan. These people are more vehemently opposed to that type of ideology than anybody in this country because they have suffered under it. And they can provide valuable information. And what's more, this puts the United States in such a tremendously risky place because we have fed directly into the so-called Islamic State's ideology. They were trying to create a war between the West and Islam and to destroy any gray zone, to say that every Muslim either has to be with them or it has to be with the West. And what we have done is said, yes, that's exactly what you have to do.
There has also been a report recently, this is not an order yet, but maybe an order in the making, that the administration in Washington might want to penalize immigrants if people in the family in some way are receiving aid from the federal government. I don't know what shape that's going to take, but what about going down that road?
I mean, so incredibly cruel, really, to think about that. These are programs like assisted lunch program for children. Children, that didn't choose where they were born, like every single other person born on this planet, and were, brought into our country. Most of our, especially think about the history of Boston. We were just had a rally in front of the Irish Potato Famine Memorial, and you look at those gaunt figures as they arrived. Did they need support? Did they need help? Yes. Who are they now? Mayor Marty Walsh's, they have become the leaders of our industries. Steve Jobs' father was a Syrian refugee who arrived on our shores. How many companies and what has Apple contributed to the American economy? And yet we want to rip away that bottom rung of the ladder and say, no, we don't believe that America is a place where immigrants come and they make a life and they succeed and they contribute. We want to penalize them and make it even harder for them to do that.
I have one more question about your organizing. You're trying to round up some votes in the state legislature, get some backers for this Safe Communities Act. How are you doing with that so far?
Excellent, amazing. It has been, the response I think is incredibly heartwarming. We had a rally yesterday in front of the State House that was supported by Senator Eldridge and freshman Rep. Juana Matias from Lawrence, and we had we handed out 1,400 flyers, so around that many people, which was an enormous response. We thought we would maybe have 200 or so, and it was tremendous. We started 2 days ago. We had 21 official co-sponsors in the House. Right now, as I was coming in, I heard it was 61. So we are seeing, I think what lawmakers are realizing is that this is not just the morally right thing to do, which I think that it is, but it is also the best thing fiscally and from a legal perspective for our state.
Thank you very much for being with us.
My pleasure.
Liza Ryan from the MIRA Coalition.